Hello and welcome to Insight. I'm Natasha Jhabhaskar. The Lok Sabha has taken up the right to fair compensation and transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation and resettlement amendment bill for consideration and passing. The bill seeks to replace the ordinance promulgated by the government in December last year. The ordinance has brought several changes in the earlier legislation passed by the UPA government in 2013. The contentious feature of the act has been that the investors require the consent of up to 80% of people whose land is acquired for private projects and of 70% of the landowners in the case of public-private partnership projects. However, the new government under Prime Minister Narendra Modi finds the provisions of the 2013 law unconducive to carry forward developmental projects. The proposed ordinance includes 5 new categories of projects that would not require prior consent from affected families, as well as social impact assessment. These include projects related to defense, rural infrastructure, affordable housing, industrial corridors and infrastructure projects. The opposition parties have dubbed the bill as draconian and anti-poor. In today's edition of Insight, I'm asking my panelists what's their take on the new land acquisition amendment bill, and will it really revive country's industrial development?
आप देखेंगे कि गांवों से गरीब किसान अपनी जमीन को औने पौने दाम बेचकर शहरों की तरफ भाग रहे हैं। उसका कारण है कि उसको तुरंत पैसे की आवश्यकता पड़ती है और पड़ने के बाद वो साहूकार के पास जाता है, उससे पैसा लेता है। जैसे अभी प्राकृतिक आपदा आई, अगर पहले भी आती रही हैं, वह पैसा चुका नहीं पाता और औने पौने दाम में साहूकार को या कोई अगर बड़ा प्रबुद्ध व्यक्ति वहां पर हो, उसको बेच देता है। आज उसी किसान को जो उतनी लागत लगाकर उतनी आमदनी नहीं कर पाता, अगर उसको सरकार 4 गुना ज्यादा दाम उसके जमीन का दे रही हो, तो आप सोच सकते हैं कि उसके जिंदगी में किस प्रकार का लाभ उसको मिल सकता है।
आप लोग समझते थे कि कृषि महत्वपूर्ण है, तो मुझे विश्वास है कि इस तरीके का भूमि अधिग्रहण विधेयक आज इस संसद में नहीं लाते, जिसके आधार पर किसानों के ऊपर इस तरीके से क्रूर हत्या, मैं शब्द इस्तेमाल कर रहा हूं, उस तरीके का एक वातावरण आज देश में उपलब्ध किया जा रहा है। आपका नारा था, अब 50 साल के बारे में भूल जाइए, क्योंकि अब आप सरकार में हैं, बारी आपकी है। उस तरफ बैठकर क्रिकेट में फ्रंट फुट पे खेलिए, बैक फुट पे नहीं। तो मैं आपसे प्रश्न पूछना चाहता हूं कि आपका नारा था, आपका नारा था सबका साथ। सर, उनको भी बोलने दीजिए कि दिल में ऊर्जा है। आपका नारा था सबका साथ सबका विकास। क्या हुआ 65% देश की आबादी का, जिसे इस बिल के आधार पर दर्दनाक स्थिति में ले जाकर आप छोड़ने वाले हैं।
Today you are talking about compensation. What is compensation? You think offering 4 times or 4.5 times is compensation? Today, with the inflation that your own finance ministry is repeating over and over again, what is the value of the Indian rupee 5 years hence? Do we realize that? Do we even think of it? Or are we so rich and so powerful that never mind, today if we are spending 5,000 rupees for a household, 5 years later we will spend 50,000 rupees. But what about the poor villager whose sources of income are extremely limited and he has nothing but land? You have to remember this.
Sir, I am also some difference of opinion. You have suggested naturally what are their amendments to bring. We are insisting it should be referred to the standing committee. We are not for the amendments, because either you accept 2013 Act as it is, or if you have got any reservations about that, you refer it to the standing committee. Let the House take the decision. And we are for that.
So MPs expressing concern on the present form of this bill and accusing the government for removing the clause which provided safeguards to the farming community. And joining me for more on this very esteemed guest with me, Suneet Chopra, who is Joint Secretary of All India Agricultural Workers Union. Thank you very much, Mr. Chopra, for joining us in this program. Also with me, Dr. T. Haq, former Chairman CACP. Thank you very much, Dr. Haq, for joining us here. With me, Advocate at Supreme Court, Pradeep Rai. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us in this program. And with me, BJP leader Gopal Krishna Agarwal. Thank you very much, Mr. Agarwal, for joining us in this program. I'll start with you, Mr. Chopra. At this stage, the government has said that the new bill will actually boost industrial development. It is also pro-farmer and pro-industry. What is your first assessment of the amendment suggested in the Land Acquisition Act of 2014?
The first thing that is anti-farmer, and I would say anti-Indian citizen, because 57% of the people of this country depend on agriculture. 94% of the agriculturists own less than 1 hectare of land. If there is no audit of the social impact, then you are actually driving people to a condition that will be worse than the 3 lakh suicides we have seen so far in the peasantry. Already, with Dr. Manmohan Singh's policies before this, we have faced lakhs of suicides of peasants. Now, it is going to get worse because even the courts, this thing is going to be beyond the jurisdiction of the courts also. So, there is no help to the helpless. Then they have allowed agricultural land to be used.
Multi-crop irrigation.
Exactly.
Right.
And more than that, they have changed the meaning of public interest for PPP schemes. So private interest will now become.
So were you
public
satisfied with the
interest
Land Acquisition Act of 2013? And
No,
are
not
you
at
saying
all.
that we don't need
Not
any
at
amendments?
all.
Not at all. Okay.
We felt that that act also needed to be gone in more deeply and to make it an act that is helpful for the peasant. Remember, when we talk of industry coming in, where is this industry coming in? 3,500 acres of land in Jhajjar were given to Ambani for 5 years. Now, the 5 years thing has gone also. Before it was that if the industry did not use it for 5 years, you will give it back.
Do you see this as practically feasible? You know, if you think of buying a house, and if you don't stay in this house, the house will go back to the builder. Is this practically feasible? You know, if you compare this with land acquisition, the fact that the land, if you don't build anything, the land will go back to the original landowner.
Is it practically feasible to drive out lakhs of Indian people and tell them, हम आपको नौकरी दे देंगे जब फैक्ट्री खुलेगी? और वो फैक्ट्री खुलती नहीं है 5 साल के लिए. जो खेती आप कर रहे थे, जो पैदावार कर रहे थे, वो भी खत्म हो गया. So you are going to destroy the rural structure of this country, and that will be much more expensive to correct.
Mr. Agarwal, you would like to respond on this? The government has said.
One more point.
Yes.
You have a food security bill. Are you going to be able to implement it with laws like this?
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay, food security will be a big challenge, especially at a time when we're talking about implementing the new amendments suggested in the Land Acquisition Act of 2013. But the government is saying it has too many flaws and we need to tackle these flaws, specifically when we're talking about the Make in India and developing India as a manufacturing hub. What are your core concerns, and is the government in a position at this stage to address these concerns? Can the government really build in political consensus?
See, I want to just clarify some of the major issues that is being discussed in the media and the people. There is a lot of misinformation and we are fighting a battle of perception. One thing is, this acquisition is not for industry. You tell me which large industry can government acquire and give it to them. It was only in SEZ or other projects only, and that is not there in this current amendment. We should restrict ourselves on the amendment. Government is saying that we can acquire from the present government wants from the amendment that the 5 categories, they are majorly defense, infrastructure, rural infrastructure, that is for electrification, then industrial corridor. Industrial corridor means where the linear projects are there for roads and the railways. 1 kilometer on both sides only. Government is saying that we will restrict to only 1 kilometer on both sides of these linear projects. So where is the problem that government is acquiring this land and giving to private industry. Only some people may have concern about the PPP project, but the government is also saying, has clearly given a clarification that in the case of PPP project, where the ownership will not be transferred to the private hands, it will rest with the government only. So I think there is lot of misinformation that is going on with regard to for which the government will acquire land on this. Other thing also I want to clarify is that the basically when you talk of the agriculture sector, we have more than 60%, 65% of population dependent on only 15 to 17% of the GDP contribution. There is large unemployment in the agriculture sector. Unless this we transfer this employable people to the manufacturing sector, that is in the Make in India
right, but
or
a point
MSME sector.
Mr. Chopra was also making, that instead of actually shifting them from their basic livelihood, why not actually to boost the agriculture sector? Why not increase your investment in the agriculture sector?
You know that average holding in our country is very low. Large number of population is dependent only on small tract of lands, and overpopulation. The problem with agriculture sector is that overpopulation is.
But how will you tackle the challenge of looming food crisis in the country, which is bound to happen in years to come? You know,
and there is a cooperative movement. You can go to cooperatives.
Yeah, I want to. This land acquisition and food security are not working at cross purposes. By land acquisition, you are not disturbing the food security. It is not. I understand that when you do for social impact assessment, there are requirement of food security are there.
Let me read this out. Specifically on the provision of multi-crop land, if you go by the old bill, the 2013 Act, it says only in extreme circumstances where multi-crop land has to be acquired at any cost, only 5% of the total multi-crop land in the district can be acquired and not more. Otherwise, the multi-crop land should not be acquired. The new amendment suggests that multi-crop irrigated land can also be acquired if for security, defense, rural infrastructure, industrial corridors and social infrastructure. Dr. Huq, there's a clear distinction between the old Act of 2013 and the amendment suggested. What it means for the overall food security situation in the country?
I personally feel that you need land for agriculture, you need land for infrastructure, you need land for industries. For various reasons, because development means all these things have to be moving simultaneously. And the present government probably, if I see them properly, they want things, particularly the development projects, to be undertaken on a fast track. I mean, things have been very slow for various reasons. The manufacturing sector has been lagging and lacking. Agriculture also growth has been slow as a result, as Mr. Agarwal said, that majority of people are dependent on agriculture, but their total contribution or share in the whole GDP is only 13%, 14%. So there is a problem. There is need for some kind of transformation in the whole situation. That is very true. Food security question, if you are raising, then I will say I am, have been working in the field of agriculture, and I was really concerned. In fact, I suggested also that as far as possible, irrigated land capable of producing 2 or 3 crops, it should not be acquired. I mean, anybody will say that, but then simultaneously also you should see that irrigation efficiency is there, and each drop of water should be utilized for improving productivity. So productivity itself today is so low. Currently, the average productivity in most of the crops is 1 ton, 2 tons per hectare, as compared to 6 tons, 7 tons in South Korea, or even in China, 4 to 5 tons. So if we improve productivity of such land, a lot of land will be available for other purposes as well, infrastructure development, industry. The government thinks this way, as I can understand. They want an enabling environment, create a kind of conducive environment and infrastructure. You develop infrastructure so that agriculture benefits, industry benefits, service sector also develops along those infrastructures. And then for that, if you are talking about this, industrial corridors, there you have to be a little careful. Careful in the sense like, who are those people who will be benefiting from industrial corridors?
Also the point of affordable housing, yes.
We have, government has clarified that we will not go beyond 1 kilometer on both sides of the main linear projects. Actually, this land acquisition is only majority for the linear projects, infrastructure projects. Even we have met thousands of farmers and organization over the period of 3-4 days when the BJP has set up this committee. They all want basically that the land may be acquired for the this infrastructure project, because it increases the value of their land. That is the only asset they have. Once a road passes through any village or a remote area, it increases the land value of all the adjoining areas. So they are not against acquiring for linear projects. They have only objection that the government should not acquire land and transfer to the private.
There are contentious issues. We've also heard the members of parliament saying that this is a very draconian law and also a pro-corporate, pro-industry and anti-farmer. But the government has also reacted on this, and it has said that its decision to bring 13 acts under the Land Acquisition Act for compensation and rehabilitation is in fact a step forward and is what you call a pro-farmer step. Should we really congratulate the government on this front, the fact that they have actually brought in all the other 13 laws also in the same ambit, which actually enables the farmer to get the same compensation and same rehabilitation?
Actually, once you have decided to take all other departments like coal, mining, NHAI, railway into this section, that itself gives you farmer a certain kind of power, a certain kind of opportunity to get more money. That is the one part. But the other part, if you say something that I am acquiring, I am acquiring your property, it means you are just snatching away. It should be like a land purchase policy. Government of India should come with any policy that is around like its land purchase policy, and then how much you are going to pay, the market rate, what is the market rate. It can't be as per the district magistrate's stamp duty rate. Already the high courts and various other courts has held that it can't be. Like if stamp duty rate is suppose in Delhi, it's higher than the market rate. But in all other places, like in Noida or in Aligarh, the rates are 750 per square meter. Can you get at that price any piece of land? It's almost impossible. The other thing that farmers, and not only farmers, the owners, like in Noida, there was a metro rail project, and sector 14A, there were acquisition of 5-6 good buildings of sector 14. Then all these owners went to the Noida Authority. They said, I don't want compensation. We want the same piece of land in some other sector. They were accommodated in sector 47 and they were more than happy. Because if they would have got the compensation.
So you are saying that the government should look for consensus, and there should be a greater understanding between the farmers with whom, from whom they're actually buying land. It should be more on the lines of a land purchase policy than on land, acquisition policy. But we also know, when we talk about public purpose, the fact that the government is saying rural infrastructure, social infrastructure, building in for industrial corridors, the greater definition of public purpose. Do you think the very definition of public purpose is not very clear, and that's where the problem is?
Correct. You are absolutely right. Actually, what's happening? You see, only I can give you the example of Noida and Gurgaon. There, all the land were acquired in the public purpose. Gurgaon Authority, Noida Authority, they got this land around 500 acres, 700 acres. And finally, what is the fate of those land? Those land were given and allotted to the private builders. Again, you see all these housing complexes, some of the private industries. Only 2 examples I have. The Dadri power project, it couldn't take off of Reliance. They returned the land to the UP government. And again, the SEZ of Reliance.
And do you share the same fear? This is going to happen even in the amendments suggested in the land acquisition? It happens.
It happens. It's happening.
Mr. Agarwal.
Clearly, in the original bill also, there is a clause that if the project does not take, Section 101 clearly specifies in the bill that if the project does not take place, is not implemented within a period of 5 years, the land will go back to the owner.
No, it says something else. It says it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that it will go back to the landowner. It says whichever is higher. In terms of if the building is built,
government will have to start the reacquisition process. That means that it will go ultimately reacquisition.
It will not go back automatically after 5 years. It was in fact suggested in the land acquisition act.
The only amendment what government has proposed is that the period is where you are talking of nuclear installation.
But my question, Mr. Agarwal, is the simple definition of public purpose, as Mr. Rai just mentioned, that you acquire a property, a land on the name of public purpose, and later later sell it off or give it off to a private player. Do you think that the government will be responsible and transparent? Because it also says another thing, that any government official, who is engaged in land acquisition acquisition, if there are any charges of corruption or any such issue, it cannot be prosecuted automatically. It has to go through the government.
Any act you say of the government, there is a requirement that prior permission. It doesn't say that you cannot go
prior permission of the government.
Only prior permission, because there are FIR and various misuse of the old act. Actually, what we have to see is the government has already defined the public purpose. Public purpose, these 5 purposes that are being defined, the government can acquire for only these 5 purposes that they are bringing in the amendment into. And those 13 acts which are already there. So I don't think there are concerns regarding the implementation of the old act. The people want their land to be acquired. They don't. There are implementational problem because collector has not given them compensation. They are putting different kind of problems on their implementation. Those side, therefore, government is proposing a tribunal or grievance redressal mechanism for better
tribunal or grievance
implementation.
redressal. But the bigger issue of land acquisition in terms of in the name of public purpose project and the very definition of public purpose.
I mean, the main problem comes basically with regard to the industrial corridors. Otherwise, I don't think anybody will question other things. PPP. And particularly
that is very important.
But PPP also, if it is done properly in a participatory manner.
Who is going to do it properly? Things have not been properly done.
No, but you need to establish.
You have to have faith on the implementation. Otherwise, the government cannot.
Will happen.
Right. Let him finish his point.
You need some kind of institutional mechanism or administrative mechanism at the local level to implement it. That must be ensured anyway as a matter of rule. Unless you do it, then nothing will happen. Secondly, about affordable housing, you were saying there could be problems elsewhere, but I have also seen in some parts of Maharashtra, particularly if you go from Nagpur to Wardha, that corridor, there are a number of affordable houses which have been built for the poor people, exclusively for the poor people, very low cost. It is not this kind of 8 lakhs, 10 lakhs kind of houses, 2-room sets, very beautifully made. I have personally seen those kind of things. So it is possible, and there is a huge demand or need for giving a house to the poor people currently. They are all shelterless, helpless, poor people living in slums. So if there is a proper, you should not criticize just for the sake of criticism.
The bigger agenda is how sincere the government is.
Criticizing for criticism. Every building in Gurgaon has affordable houses for people. Nobody gets them. So it is all done by the back door.
This is the problem is implementation.
That basically asks for...
land use is changed. Even the land next to the golf course in Gurgaon was forest. It was under DLF.
Okay, so Mr. Chopra, you're saying there are bigger challenges, specifically in the front of implementation, and how far the government can ensure checks and balances, greater regulation, greater transparency, accountability. When we talk about something as critical as the land acquisition amendment suggested for the Land Acquisition Act of 2013. It's now time for me to take a short break. Next, when we come back on the other side, we'll also try and understand the whole controversy around the social impact assessment. Stay tuned.
वो क्या है जो हम सबको प्रेरित करता रहा हिंसा के बिना स्वाधीनता के लिए लड़ने को? वो क्या है जो राष्ट्रीय दल को चालित करता है कट्टर विरोधी पर काबू पाने को? वो क्या है जो भारत के जन जन से इतनी मेहनत करवाता है आर्थिक प्रगति के लिए, प्रतिबद्धता और हमारे देश का गौरव? भारत एक और ऐतिहासिक उपलब्धि के लिए तैयार है, खुले में शौच का समापन। भारत को एक स्वच्छ और खुशहाल देश बनाने में मदद करें, ये हमारे हाथ में है।
देख 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 दर्शन, अरे 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 दर्शन, ओए 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 दर्शन।
जल्दी मचाकर, ट्रैफिक रूल को न मानकर और हेलमेट न पहनकर आप स्टाइल नहीं देते हैं, बल्कि खतरा उठाते हैं और कई बार इसकी कीमत भी चुकाते हैं।
बाइक यातायात के लिए है, स्टंट के लिए इसका इस्तेमाल भारी पड़ सकता है। 2 पहिया के हैं 2 नियम, सावधानी और संयम।
सड़क परिवहन और राजमार्ग मंत्रालय द्वारा जनहित में जारी। जी हाँ, किसान विकास पत्र वापस आ गया है। 100 महीने में निवेश दुगना, 2.5 वर्ष बाद भुगतान की सुविधा। संपर्क करें अपने नजदीकी डाकघर से।
बीड़ी सिगरेट का धुआं धूम्रपान ना करने वालों के लिए भी हानिकारक है। ये गले से अंदर जाके ना सिर्फ फेफड़ों को नुकसान पहुंचाता है, बल्कि कुछ ही मिनटों में खून को गाढ़ा करके दिल तक जाने वाली मुख्य नसों को नष्ट कर देता है। इससे दिल में खून संचार कम होने लगता है, जिससे दिल का दौरा पड़ सकता है। पैसिव स्मोकिंग जानलेवा है, इसे नकारें।
कहाँ चले मोटू, साइकिल पर जुल्म ढाते हुए?
जन धन योजना को लेके कुछ सूचना चाहिए, तो आरटीआई का आवेदन देने जा रहा हूँ।
सूचना मैं दे देता हूँ। जन धन योजना यानी आप 0 बैलेंस पर अकाउंट खोल सकते हो। डेबिट कार्ड के साथ 1 लाख का दुर्घटना बीमा और 5,000 तक की प्रति परिवार ओवरड्राफ्ट सुविधा।
तुम्हें ये सब जानकारी कैसे?
अरे मेरे पास ही नहीं, ये जानकारी चंदू के पास भी है। ये सब सूचना टेलीविजन, वेबसाइट, रेडियो और अखबार से आसानी से मिल जाती है। सूचना के अधिकार के तहत सरकार खुद ही पूरी जानकारी उपलब्ध कराती है, ताकि कोई आवेदन डालने की जरूरत ही ना पड़े। और अगर ये सब पढ़ने और समझने के बाद भी जरूरत पड़ जाए, तो सूचना का अधिकार हमेशा हमारे साथ है।
वाह पतलू, तूने पहली बार जिंदगी में कोई काम की बात की है।
अब सूचना के अधिकार के तहत हर जानकारी आपके हाथ, पर जब भी जरूरत पड़े तो सूचना पाने का अधिकार हमेशा आपके साथ।
बीड़ी सिगरेट का धुआं धूम्रपान ना करने वालों के लिए भी हानिकारक है। ये गले से अंदर जाके ना सिर्फ फेफड़ों को नुकसान पहुंचाता है, बल्कि कुछ ही मिनटों में खून को गाढ़ा करके दिल तक जाने वाली मुख्य नसों को नष्ट कर देता है। इससे दिल में खून संचार कम होने लगता है, जिससे दिल का दौरा पड़ सकता है। पैसिव स्मोकिंग जानलेवा है, इसे नकारें।
मकान बनाते समय लापरवाही भूकंप में महंगी पड़ सकती है। भूकंप से ईंट या पत्थर की चुनाई वाले मकान में दरारें न आए, इसलिए आप लिंटल और प्लिंथ लेवल पर और जोन 5 के मकान में सिल लेवल पर भी भूकंप पट्टियां लगवाएं। हर कोने और जोड़ पर खड़े सरिये लगवाएं। घर सुरक्षित तो आप सुरक्षित। आपके हित में तत्पर एनडीएमए।
Poor guy. What's his name?
पुष्पिंदर।
अरे एक मिनट, पुष्पिंदर को जाने दो।
क्या पुष्पिंदर?
Happy birthday पुष्पिंदर।
Who told you मेरा नाम पुष्पिंदर है? I'm समीर।
हमेशा गाड़ी पुश करते दिखोगे तो लोग ऐसे ही नाम देंगे। अपना ECG सही रखो। ECG यानी इंजन, क्लच और गियर, और सर्वो 40 यानी ECG स्पेशलिस्ट। ये गाड़ी रखे टिप टॉप और इज्जत भी। फ्रॉम इंडियन ऑयल।
हेलो पापा।
कब से फोन कर रहा हूँ, फोन ही नहीं लग रहा है। अच्छा घर पहुँची कि नहीं?
रास्ते में हूँ, आज ऑफिस में लेट हो गया था।
ऐसा क्या काम आ गया आज? बेटा 12 बज रहे हैं।
लास्ट मिनट ऑफिस में काम आ गया था, फोन नहीं कर पाई।
अच्छा घर कैसे जा रही हो?
मैंने टैक्सी ले ली है।
ऑफिस से कोई है तुम्हारे साथ?
नहीं, मैं अकेले हूँ।
अकेली? टैक्सी में इतनी रात में?
अरे पापा आप सुनो तो मेरी बात। पापा
सुनो, टैक्सी का नंबर नोट करो।
एक सेकंड होल्ड करो।
नहीं मुझे बताओ टैक्सी का नंबर। चलो।
हाँ आप चिंता मत कीजिए, मैं आपके बेटे को ठीक से घर पहुंचा दूंगी।
जितनी ज्यादा औरतें होंगी, ये दुनिया उनके लिए उतनी ही बेहतर होगी। चलिए इस दुनिया में बेटियों की जगह पहचानें।
प्रियंका भारती?
हाँ।
ए शारदा, विमल, हरिया सब इधर आओ। ये प्रियंका, बहुत नाम है इनका। अपनी इज्जत और स्वच्छता की खातिर अपने लगन के दूसरे दिन ससुराल छोड़ने की हिम्मत दिखाई और अपने मर्द से शौचालय बनवाने की मांग की। सुना उसने? जब सोच और इरादा नेक हो तो सब सुनते हैं, जैसे इसके मर्द ने सुना।
स्वच्छ भारत मिशन, एक कदम स्वच्छता की ओर।
आप भी अपने घर में शौचालय बनवाएं और इस्तेमाल करें। जहाँ सोच वहाँ शौचालय।
Welcome back. You're watching Insight. In today's edition, we are trying to understand the important amendments suggested by the government in the Land Acquisition Bill of 2013. So an important issue, a controversial issue related to the land acquisition bill of 2013, which said that social impact assessment is a must for every acquisition. The suggested amendment says not required if the project is for security, defense, rural infrastructure, industrial corridor and social infrastructure. Mr. Chopra, on one side we are talking about compensation and rehabilitation. If we don't do social impact assessment, then are we technically saying that the compensation will only be given to the landowner and not to the people who are dependent or who are getting their livelihood from that particular piece of land?
Exactly. On behalf of agricultural labor, I would say that this will lead to absolute chaos. And a social impact study is extremely important because these people will be driven into slums, they will be driven into the sex trade, they will be driven into all kinds of inhuman things which will result in far greater social problems which you'll have to pay much more for. And your industrialists also, from my experience, they are not fast in developing things. So they will also be demanding more money. So my point is, you're going to be giving money where it is not required, and you will be denying livelihoods to the people. Dr. Manmohan Singh reduced the rural planning budgets. And that was the first time we heard of mass suicides of farmers.
Right. But
So
if you
my
also
point
try,
is the
if you
results
also
are
try to understand the response of different state governments, because let's not forget land acquisition actually comes under the state government's domain and land comes under the domain of the central. But also if you try and understand about how states have responded, earlier Haryana and Kerala wanted to remove the consent clause for PPP or bring it down to 50%. States like Assam, Haryana and Himachal Pradesh felt that the definition of affected family is too broad. So this cannot really bring in good projects, industrial projects, if we talk about investors coming in. So even the state governments on the other side feel the same way.
Are the state governments any different? Recently, the Haryana chief minister was driving through Karnal, kills a man and injures 2 policemen, and drives off. I mean, a normal driver would have been caught and put in jail. My point is, if this is your perception, the Haryana state government is hardly a state government, either this or Mr. Huda's. If I go to the golf links land of Gurgaon.
No, what I'm trying to understand here is, what I'm trying to understand
no
here is
different from the government at the center.
No, what I'm asking,
Ketu hain.
what I'm also asking, Dr. Haq, is that the way we have seen the opposition responding, different parties saying that this is not going to work, you must have social impact assessment, but also we know that the state governments themselves realize that, you know, for any acquisition to happen in reality, if you have to go by the same old method of the Land Acquisition Act of 2013 or the one which was earlier suggested, do you think you can actually implement, you know, the clauses which is an important component of the Land Acquisition Act of 2013? Because social impact assessment, the definition of a broader family, of affected families, is rather too broad, and you can never understand who is actually the real ones who are affected.
No, there are 2 things in this. One is that recently in the Revenue Ministers' Conference, you can see a few months back, when Mr. Gadkari was the Rural Development Minister in charge also. That time, in fact, from almost all the states, excepting West Bengal, they said, I think there is need for some kind of amendment in the existing law, without which probably nothing will happen if you really want to industrialize or bring about certain new entrepreneurships and things like that, even affordable housing and also rural infrastructure. It is not just infrastructure in urban areas, even rural infrastructure.
In fact, states like Karnataka, Kerala, Maharashtra and Manipur has demanded that the process be restricted to only larger projects. So social impact assessment should only happen to larger projects.
But at the same time, I will say social impact assessment study kind of thing is very important, because I did something recently in some projects. This helps guide the government to assess the gravity of the situation, the kind of people who will be affected, how much compensation package will be required in the whole process. So I think this helps the government actually, truly speaking, instead of saying that otherwise. But certainly it has to be done by people who know it, not just to any ABCD, and also it has to be done on a fast track.
Okay, Mr. Agrawal, we know that in the budget document, the finance minister said that one of the biggest challenge which Indian economy is facing is low agricultural income, and the first target is to how to actually shift the agricultural workers to other areas. We also heard Mr. Chopra, who is saying that the industries, setting up industries will take a lot of time, from 5 to 10 to 15 years. It will not immediately give you jobs. Now here you are saying no social impact assessment needed on public purpose projects related to rural infrastructure, social infrastructure, industrial corridors. Let's not forget there are many farmers who have very small land holdings and who don't even have small land holdings. They're actually working on someone else's land holdings and getting their livelihood from there. In this scenario, you will not give them directly the compensation if you don't do social impact assessment.
I want to clarify here that the not doing social impact assessment is not saying that you are not paying them compensation.
No, paying compensation only to the landowner, but not to the person who is deriving his livelihood from there.
Government is planning that the landless agricultural laborers should also get a compensation or rehabilitation. That is by not doing social impact assessment, we are not removing their rights or we are not denying them the rights to hold them. And another one thing that budget also FM mentioned, that more than 4 lakh crore projects are being held up from the because of various reasons. So you have to see the both side of the coins. Stakeholders, industry is also a stakeholder, middle class is also a stakeholder. Ultimately, if the bank fails, their loans fail, who is going to pay the bill? So you have to see on the both sides. And I don't think anywhere the government is saying that we will not go for the rehabilitation or we will not reduce the compensation. Only the process of social
impact. Right, but it has categorically said that there will be no social impact assessment.
But their compensation will not be given.
Okay, quickly then I'll come to Mr. Rai. Yes.
I will say that you should not really fear so much about the social impact assessment. My own assessment is, because I did this kind of exercise for some projects. If you do it on a fast track, get it done by some good people who understand the whole issues, I think it is very helpful for the government also and also for the people. And there will be some kind of confidence building and trust between the government and the people.
And that procedure may be reduced. It's a complicated procedure. And the failure to do that has resulted in
but one argument is that if you do social impact assessment, it takes a lot of time, first thing, and second thing also that in acquiring land for industrial projects, this is one thing that investors fear, because you start getting into the social impact assessment mess, and it takes a lot of time, and the projects don't really take it takes generally from 2 to 5 years to acquire a land, then go ahead with building an industry,
and then to restrict 5 years period also if you don't implement within 5
years.
So
there are feasibility challenges. How do you actually implement something which is as crucial as a social impact assessment?
What I feel that if social impact assessment is as far as this part is concerned, what Government of India should have done, suppose if the property is self-acquired, then you may delay it. But if this is a traditional property, I have acquired by heredity, but suppose I am there by the 4th generation, I am the crop property is there. My son, my grandson, they are not even aware that this property is going from me. And suppose compensation I am taking, whatever compensation is there, I will spend. Many of the people I know, they have spent crores of crores, and their children they don't have anything to spend. There is certain, it should be there. Suppose if government is paying compensation 4 times or 5 times, there should be a specific provision that yes, this part must be kept for the children, must be kept for the other minors who are today, they are minors. They don't know what their parents are doing. Suppose if it's self-acquired property, that is a different case. But if it is a traditional property, you got it by heredity, how can you just take the entire compensation? The other part, I'm coming on that. The social impact assessment is must. Suppose today I have 5 acres. The neighbors, they advise you don't sell it. What you are just spoiling it. You please try to save for your children. You do all kind of advice. Suppose if government comes in that role, what is harm into it? And it is not time taking at all. I am telling that in Maharashtra, I must praise Mr. Agarwal, Nitin Gadkari. Nitin Gadkari has done wonderful job. What Mr. Haq was telling.
Housing for
yes,
poor.
For
I have also
housing
seen those.
And also in the road projects and all kind of other developmental projects, he has done wonders. But at the same time, there are many other state governments, they are not actually doing this.
Okay, so are you saying that this provision, which is the amendment suggested in the 2013 original act, the government should think about it and should actually bring in the concept of social impact assessment, even if the project is under the 5 major categories as suggested by the government?
I am telling not only in the 5 categories, Suppose if it is not my self-acquired property and I am selling it to anybody, it should be there. It is required. For suppose if I am selling it to you or selling it to any private entity, even that this provision should be there, and government should introduce this part.
Okay. Now, one major argument.
There's just one more point that I wanted to raise, because Dr. Haq had said, I know that the Tripura government did not approve of this. And also I know that for tribal societies in places like Orissa, Chhattisgarh, there are minerals under the ground.
No, they are
and these people are not being given the real value of what they are losing. And I think this has to be clarified, and it must come out under this social impact assessment.
One point I want to mention in this, that the constitution under section 5 and 6 chapter, it protects the tribal rights, right to forest. That is, because I don't think it will, government has the power to assert the tribal rights.
Right, but at this stage, the bigger challenge for the government is how will it get this bill approved in the parliament, and whether it can do that. Even we know that the Lok Sabha will hold discussion on this issue at least for another 3-4 hours. The total duration is for 8 hours for a discussion on this. But the bigger challenge, do you think, Mr. Agrawal, the government, through this ordinance route, because if it's not passed in the Rajya Sabha, then the bill gets lapsed. What is in fact in the mind of the BJP at this stage?
The BJP party thinks that people will understand. There are problems, but misinformation and perception have to be removed, and the associate parties, their concerns will be taken care of. Some of the concerns are, we feel that they may be genuine, like that PPP or infrastructure corridor or social impact assessment. It may be the scope can be reduced or light. And then some land, those issues can be tackled. And I think with those
okay, so should we hope that consent and social impact assessment, both these two controversial issues, will be incorporated in the new amendments suggested by the government?
The actual thing is that the government has created a situation for itself. I mean, I would only refer to Mrs. Sule's speech yesterday, where she said, what were the forces that were forcing you to pass this ordinance? The fact is, it was not necessary.
Right.
And when you've done something which is not necessary, nobody is going to trust you, especially if you have only 30% of the vote and you have 282 seats in parliament. You can't railroad democracy. The Indian people must be consulted.
Right, but we
with
also...
regard to ordinance, I just want to clarify that there was a necessity of passing the ordinance, because the original act, which is passed in 2013, said that these 13 acts which were outside the scope of the Compensation Act had to be brought into the main this Compensation Act before 31st December
okay, so you're
2014.
quoting the 13 statutes that were previously exempted should be included.
And therefore, the government had to pass an ordinance.
Okay, but we also know that there was the whole atmosphere of depressed investor sentiment, and the idea was to actually bring in greater investments. But at this stage also, there's high level of policy uncertainty. We don't know whether the bill will get passed or not, and the fact that the government wants to move away from the culture of avoid, bypass, confuse and delay, as Prime Minister Modi earlier had said, to the one of responsibility, ownership, accountability and discipline. Maybe if that can happen through this particular bill. But final comments on the program, I'll start with you,
is an
Mr.
ordinance
Chopra.
Discipline?
Okay.
I think it's a lack of discipline,
okay,
of
final
parliamentary sense.
Final comments on the program. Mr. Chopra, what is the best land acquisition bill for you?
My point is, this whole thing should go to be discussed thoroughly in Parliament, and all the organizations of the farmers and agricultural laborers and the tribals must be consulted as to what they think is good.
Okay.
You have to win over the confidence of the people. Only then such a far-reaching law can be passed.
Okay, final comments from you, Dr. Haq. What is in fact the best land acquisition bill? Because even earlier we have seen members of the NSC saying the previous Land Act of 2013 is both anti-farmer and anti-industry. This one is pro-farmer, pro-industry and anti-farmer. So we don't really know what is actually the best form of land acquisition bill.
Still, I believe, particularly in the present context, there is a lot of confusion and unnecessary, I should say. The government of India should now come out very clearly with their development agenda, try to convince the people that this is what we want to do, and we need your help and cooperation. And there are farmers associations, farmers groups, and other people who can be brought in for discussion.
Involve
There are ways to-
stakeholders in discussions and
exactly.
framing these bills, and maybe if the bill has to go to the Parliamentary Standing Committee, which we don't know at this stage. Final comments from you, Mr. Rai.
You see, what in my opinion, Government of India and earlier this act was completely like a manifesto. Just before election, government comes with some act. That was a manifesto, and they gave too much to the farmers. Now the government, not only farmers, to the stakeholders. Now in this parliament, Narendra Modi government, they want to do something. They want to present something that yes, to give a message to investors that we can do this, we can do that, and Government of India is pro-investors, there is an environment. All these things are there. Despite the fact, the way they have communicated is completely confuse the common man.
Okay.
And in other words, they should have not taken out the jurisdiction of civil courts.
Exactly.
In this bill itself, they are introducing the civil court has no right, and no other court will pass any injunction. This is illegal. Anyway, if you come with this act, the stay will be there. Courts are not going to restrain themselves because you can't overwrite any act or anything. Who can change Article 226 and 32?
Courts are not going to restrain themselves, but the bigger question is, will this really boost industrial development? Because everything is revolving around that this is going to actually increase, bring in investments, improve the overall employment scenario, increase also the share of manufacturing in the GDP. Will this all really happen if the bill is not passed in the Parliament?
Actually, land acquisition is a complicated issue, and there are various stakeholders. You cannot see only on one part of the view. You have to see a comprehensive view. Because an individual whose land is acquired, he will be troubled and he will need to be compensated adequately. Ultimately, the act will define how he will be compensated. But I think there are some concerns which may be genuine, which are genuine. I have also met.
Right, but tough days ahead for the NDA
but those
to build in political
stakeholders, I
consensus?
think the government will need to take some of the concerns of the stakeholders into account, and then this is a forward-looking bill.
And will
I
you
think
agree?
it will
Will you agree, Mr. Agarwal, this is not going to be an easy task for the government at this stage, which has to bring in political consensus on several critical issues?
Because this is a difficult process. Ultimately, land acquisition
not just political consensus, but also involving stakeholders
you
like
see,
you.
it's livelihoods,
It's a conflict resolution.
society, generations. It's not just compensation.
Okay, not compensation,
so
but
this is not an easy thing to do.
Completely out of time.
And the other thing is, you can't forget 57% of the people for 2% investors.
Okay, thank you very much.
No, it is not for investors.
Thank you.
This is the misconception that is going on.
Okay. Thank you very much.
It's for the economic development of the country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chopra, Dr. Haq, Mr. Rai, and Mr. Agarwal for joining us in this program. Thank you very much for watching, and we now take you straight to Lok Sabha for live proceedings. Thank you.